even if you're just focusing on the PGA Tour and you said, I'm just going to do a model that's really focusing on shot length data, and then another person said, well, I'm going to just use total scores. And even though the shot length data clearly gives you more, it does give you more information, and some of that information is actionable. Just the fact that only 80% of the tournaments are played at shot length courses, the total SG model is going to outperform the shot length model just because it's using more data.
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host, and my guest on this episode is Matt Courchene. He is the co-creator of Data Golf with his brother, Will. Among other topics, in this episode, we talk about how he makes his golf predictions, which have market influence. We talk about which types of shots are more predictive than others, and we also talk about the U.S. Open. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Ranks Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that gives data-driven betting information that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. This is some unsolicited feedback on the newsletter. Quote, "This newsletter is one of my must-read things that I actively look forward to reading as soon as I see it. It's just the right length with just the right amount of information. A timeless classic." End quote. That was from Joe G. To get this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for sports betting information based on data and analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the podcast is Matt Courchene. He is the co-creator of Data Golf, the go-to site for golf analytics, and he co-created it with his brother, Will. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ed, thanks a lot for having me on.
Absolutely. Matt, I really want to know more about your story. How did you get started into data analytics, your background, and what made you get into golf and creating Data Golf?
Sure, yeah, so I guess I'll start with golf. Golf was just, I have two brothers and we played most sports growing up, but golf was sort of the main one pretty much from age like 10 to 22. I played it in university as well. And so during that time, I was like maybe a scratch or better for probably from like age 15 onwards. And now I'm no longer a scratch. But and then in university, I started in biochemistry actually. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And then I sort of ended up getting a minor in economics. And then I kind of liked econ. I did a master's, and I think at that point I got more interested in, because economics is a very broad field, and there's definitely the theory side of it, but there's also a big empirical side of it, and a lot of innovation in certain parts of statistics happens in economics. And so in my master's, I got interested in stats, and then I decided for some reason to move on to a PhD, and it was in the second year, a PhD in economics, and it was in the second year of that program that Will and I kind of started Data Golf did start so this was 2015, and that was when Data Golf started, and just started off as a WordPress blog. Will and I thought that there was a void in the golf space for analytical content. There were some people doing work. Mark Brody had created Strokes Gained a while back, but in the public media sphere, there wasn't much. So we started Data Golf in 2015 with the idea of just producing good content for golf fans. We had no interest in betting or anything at that point. And yeah, that's how it started. And we were my brother also, so I run Data Golf with my younger brother, and he's also has a similar background, played a ton of golf growing up, was a good competitive golfer. He stopped after a master's in economics, but his background is also in that field. So yeah, we both had economics degrees and we both loved golf. So that's why we started Data Golf.
That's awesome. Did you continue with your PhD program, or did you decide to stop?
I did for a long time. I actually formally, a bit sadly, but I'm definitely at peace with it, I formally withdrew from it like 4 months ago. I sort of did 4 years, and at this point, Data Golf was taking up more and more of my time, and I took a formal year off for my 5th year in the PhD. and then I just didn't. It's hard to do it a lot. PhDs vary a lot by field, but econ really requires full investment. And I just yeah, it was really hard to do part time, and at some point I was paying tuition and not doing any work on it essentially, so it just didn't make sense. So I still got a ton. Honestly, I got a ton out of that degree with the people I met, and I would definitely probably wouldn't be doing a lot of the stuff with data golf if I didn't. Well, I didn't get the degree, but if I hadn't done that program, so I still value it a lot, but didn't actually finish it.
No, no. I mean, data golf to me seems like a PhD thesis in and of itself, and we'll get into the details of that. But before we do that, what were you researching in your econ PhD?
I started my field was labor economics. So there was some nitty gritty statistical stuff I was working on, but my main paper was studying immigration in Canada. I'm Canadian, and I was using this really good administrative tax data um, from Statistics Canada, and I basically had the data on like the universe of uh, adults in Canada from for like 10 years, following people over time, and I could tell what firms they were working at. And so I was kind of trying to look at just what I mean, it was pretty broad. Like I was just trying to see what the when a new immigrant comes to Canada, what do their first few jobs look like? And I was trying to get at this, especially in lower skill employment, this thing that appears to be true, which is that immigrants tend to cluster by ethnicity, and you'll often see firms that are full of all the employees are from the same country. And I was trying to look at whether or not that hinders their sort of career path if they can't sort of get out of the network they start in. So yeah, that was the rough idea. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Was this more kind of a data study, or were you trying to apply more advanced statistical methods to understand that
Uh,
problem?
I was trying. I mean, honestly, it was a good idea in theory, but the data was so massive, and it was the point where I stopped, it was still mostly just data exploration. Yeah, I mean, there's actually some models that I was using that we use in golf, which we'll probably talk about later. Just, but yeah, it was mostly data exploration because I don't know, economics is super hard compared to just because things are so, compared to sports, it's not a controlled environment. It's really hard to tease out anything to do with wages. So it became a bit of a mess and probably was part of the reason I stopped working on that project.
Cool. So
Mhm.
Matt, then you started Data Golf during this time, and it's become the go-to site for golf analytics and betting as well. Let's dig into the model. You have a predictive model. What goes into that?
Yeah, so I like to think of our model in, I guess there's three steps to keep it at a really high level to start. The first is sort of so in the simple case, just imagine we're just going to use round scores from golf tournaments, so just the total score that a player shot. And we have these tournaments uh, all over the world with all these overlapping fields. There might be some players that only play in Europe and they never compete directly against guys in the US. So the first step is kind of this method for how are we going to get a good measure of performance from each round of golf, because using raw score or score relative to par is not it's not good in golf just because courses vary a lot in terms of difficulty. A 69 at the US Open is a way better score than a 69 at the John Deere Classic, which is played on an easy course. So first step is like a method to properly compare performances across all these different tours, and that's done with like a ultimately it is a regression, but it's like a two-way fixed effects thing where you can estimate you can fairly estimate everybody's performance as long as everybody's connected. Like player A has played against player B, who's played against player C, so now we can compare player A and player C. And there's a lot of details there, but that's the high level. So the first step, yeah, is adjusting. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say what exactly do you mean by like fixed effects?
Oh, so yeah, so in economics, like a two-way fixed effect model would be, or in econometrics is like you're running a regression and you have a dummy variable for, in this case, every golfer and every tournament round, and so you're basically simultaneously estimating player skill and course difficulty slash field strength. It's you can't actually separate those last two things, but it doesn't really matter. But so you're intuitively like if you think about regression in terms of uh, intuitively, what I'm trying to get out of that is a measure of uh, how hard the course was after controlling for player skill. And
Right.
then once you have these like true measures of course difficulty, then you can you can create what we call true strokes gained on our website, which is uh,
Right.
yeah, strokes gained relative to an average PGA Tour player. So yeah,
So the fixed effects essentially means you're trying to estimate two different things at the same time, and your least squares is essentially doing that for you. Is that roughly right?
yeah, yeah, that's roughly right. And one thing I should add is I use fixed effects, but fixed effects would actually that would force you to assume that player skill is like constant over time. So every player,
Mhm.
which obviously isn't true. If you put Tiger in the data and you have 15 years of data, you're not going to assume that Tiger's skill has not changed over that 15-year period. So and this has actually been something we struggle with a lot, but there's various things we're doing to allow player skill to evolve over time. Just because you have to have that in golf.
Right. So, you're assuming that player skill is a function of time, right? Is that
Yeah,
how?
yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah, so
then,
player skill is going to be a function because you're going to have this with these fixed effects model. This is like you're going to have this problem of where you can't separate. Uh, there's this classic problem in economics or in all fields really, you can't separate age, time, and year effects because they're collinear. So we have basically I'm letting Tiger's skill evolve. Tiger, for example, as a function of his sequence of rounds played. So like he started playing golf in 97, and so his skill is going to evolve along his specific timeline. It's not going to actually, which isn't even important. It doesn't matter. I was going to say as opposed to it evolving over years, but it doesn't really matter. Golfer skill is allowed to vary over time. Is the high level, yeah.
sure, for sure. And then you're kind of solving for that golfer skill at every unit time, presumably weeks, because that's
Yep,
the unit in which golf is played, right?
yep, exactly. So what you would get out of this is you'd have player skill. You would estimate player skill at every point in time, and you would also estimate these true course difficulty parameters. And then what we want to get out of that in the simple setup to the model is just our value for the value for true strokes gained for every performance. And so I think of this as the first step because this is what's going to be this measure of performance is what's going to ultimately be fed into the second step, which is
Yeah.
now that okay,
Before we
sure,
get
yeah,
into the second step, real quick. Um,
sure.
so this is your definition of true strokes gained. It is basically strokes gained accounting for where you played and as a function of time, right?
Well, true strokes gained is just it's not golfer's skill. True strokes gained is just the measure of performance at a specific in a specific round. So it's not a function of time. Uh, it's a golfer's performance relative to what we would have expected from like an average PGA Tour field. So that in terms of the regression that we just ran, what I actually want to get out of that, I actually don't care about those golfer skills at the moment. What I actually care about is the true course difficulty parameters because once I get that and it says, okay, this course, uh, if a PGA Tour field played here, we would have expected them to shoot 72, and then we know that a golfer shot 69, so his true strokes gained is +3 on that course. And in the John Deere example, the true course difficulty would have been something like 67 or something, 67.5. So then the 69 would have been a true SG of negative 1.5.
Right. So I guess my question is, okay, actually, first let's go into one little detail. So you're using data from around the world. Some of that is just scores from rounds, but of course there's shot link data where you can get the shots from various aspects of the game, off the tee, putting, etc. How does at this point, are you working in that shot link data when it's available?
Yep. Yeah, so we definitely, we worked that in. So I was just starting with the simple version, which would be round scores, but so PGA Tour events and also European Tour events to some degree, their data is worse, but they also have shot link data. And so the first step we would take is the PGA Tour likes to report, and we calculate these ourselves as well, like strokes gained off the tee on approach, around the green, and putting, and they would, if we sum that up in a golfer's round, because obviously those are shot level metrics, we'll have a value for each of those for a given round, which essentially now we have total strokes gained broken down in those four categories. And we do the same method I just described. I do that for each category. So we would have adjusted for every player performance. We'd have true strokes gained total, true strokes gained off the tee, approach, etc. And they all add up to strokes gained total, obviously. And
Sure.
there is there actually a surprisingly difficult problem is the fact that the strokes gained categories are only available at, like, they're not available at all the events. So you have to figure out a way to incorporate them, but also account for the fact that some events don't have them, and there is a lot of nuance there for trying to do that effectively. Like if you were to just say, okay, I'm just gonna, even if you're just focusing on the PGA Tour and you said, I'm just gonna do a model that's really focusing on shot length data, and then another person said, well, I'm gonna just use total scores, and even though the shot length data clearly gives you more, it does give you more information, and some of that information is actionable. Just the fact that only 80% of the tournaments are played at shot length courses, the total SG model is going to outperform the shot length model just because it's using more data, and
Right.
it's really hard to actually improve upon. Total scores gives you a lot of information. I guess I'd put it that way. So the strokes gained categories help, but you need to, yeah, incorporate them in a smart way to account for the fact that you don't have them in every event.
Yeah. So Colin Davey, a friend of mine, has done golf calculations, and he made this point to me a bunch of years ago. It's like, I don't just use shot link data. I use the bigger data set of just round scores, and he also said that that led to better predictions as well. When you have the true strokes gained for every player for these four categories, is that the result of this analysis, basically doing the least squares for um, for the for the players and the courses?
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
true strokes gained pops out of that, with these, like I said, with these true course difficulty parameters, and then we're just looking at performance relative to that. So yeah, the first step is adjusting the strokes gain data to get these clean metrics, or relatively clean metrics of performance. And I guess to finish it off, the only other things we do this for is, so we do strokes gained total or round scores, the category SG, and then we also do like true driving distance and true driving accuracy, just because those get fed into the model as well. And we're working on stuff with actually using ShotLink more, like using the ShotLink data more than we currently do, because this is still all the round level. This is still, you
Right.
need ShotLink data to calculate the strokes gained categories, but then we're just aggregating up to the round level, and there's reasons for that, which we can get into. But yeah, we are, once you start trying to adjust at the shot level for like the difficulty of a given shot, then it's kind of a different ballgame. It's a lot trickier.
Oh, wait. So in terms of at the shot level, meaning the four different categories that you're looking at?
No, at the shot level, like no, that's very similar to total scores. I mean, suppose I wanted to start using. I've been working on this recently. Suppose I want to start estimating player skill at specific shot types, like over 150 yards from the fairway versus under 100. So I want to basically figure out who are the good wedge players and who are the good long iron players. Um, then I need to start looking at shot data. Like I could do, maybe I want to do some weighted average of a golfer's historical strokes gained on these long iron shots. And so to do that weighted average, I need to now adjust, because not all long iron shots are equal. If you're playing super
Sure.
firm greens, then so that's what I meant. Like so now you have to adjust each of these shots for how difficult they were, which is just sort of a different. Some of the method, it's similar. There's similar methods, but it's just different.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm always impressed with the level of detail that you do with your golf calculations, and what I hear that Rufus Peabody does with his golf calculations. Right, there's a lot of nuance. I think a little bit later we'll talk about how tee times affect predictions, right? And things are different in the morning versus afternoon tee times, which for me, as someone who doesn't play golf, strikes me as kind of wild. But it sounds like when you're doing this kind of wedge game versus uh, that you were just talking about, it sounds like you get into all kinds of details, maybe even like the type of grass that it's played on, right?
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, yeah. There are a lot of, yeah. It's a fine line to sort of walk, because there is sort of an infinite number of uh, theories you could have about things that affect golf performance, and certainly grass type is one of them. But not grass type on approach shots. That would be one level too far probably. But most people think grass type matters for putting. We don't really account for that kind of stuff. We don't account for grass type and putting, but uh, there are. I mean, the way I think about our model is sort of, we have our baseline, and this is kind of how we present it on the website. We have our baseline model that sort of, this is how we would predict if we were only using round scores. But then, and actually, this reflects how our model and our website has evolved too. Like you can progressively start adding more and more uh, things to this model that you're accounting for, and you're kind of deviating off your baseline. Like now, like the first step is you're gonna account for not just total score, but their strokes gained category score. So this sort of moves certain guys off of the base, the baseline prediction, and so on. And like as the years have gone by, yeah, we've added more and more details to that because yeah, there are a lot of minor things, seemingly minor things in golf that matter, and they add up when in terms of prediction, predictive power.
Right, right, absolutely. So when we're looking at the golf ratings, you kind of mentioned that you can take this total strokes gained, total I guess what total true strokes gained. So
Yeah, yeah.
database.
Yeah, we can call it whatever. If you say when I say total strokes gained now, I'm talking about true or adjusted strokes gained. So either one's good. Yeah.
Right, the one that's been adjusted by this regression model. And you said there was some intricacies of combining that with the more granular level where you're looking at the different types of shots. Just maybe a broad overview of the difficulties and how you account for that or how that works its way into the predictive model.
Sure. So the basic reason that you would want to account for like strokes gained off the tee, strokes gained approach, or more generally, anytime you want to in any sport or field or not field, but any sport where you're trying to predict something, if you want to get more granular, the reason there has to be a reason for it, and it usually should be that if your goal is to predict, it should be that these individual components have like differential predictive power or something along those lines. So, and that's the case with the strokes gained category. So, like off the tee performance, so driving, and this fits with intuition, is a lot more predictive of future performance than say putting. And I think that makes sense because anyone who's played golf knows that well, once you reach a certain level, distance is relatively predictable off the tee. Like Rory is going to pound the ball over 300 yards every time he plays, but putting is much more variable. And so uh, the upshot of that is if you have two golfers who, if you're just kind of looking at their recent performances, like say the last 10, 15 rounds, if one guy has done it by improving his driving off the tee and another guy has done it through some really good putting rounds, you're not going to update the latter golfer's skill as much as the first one, just because putting is super variable and it's likely that he's just on the positive side of variance there. So that's the reason we want to incorporate the strokes in categories. Uh, the problem the problem is like I guess it can be illustrated with like an example. If Rory hasn't, just to stick with Rory McIlroy, like if he hasn't played back when he used to play more in Europe, like suppose he plays whatever 10 rounds at the start of the year in the U.S. and he's playing really well, he's hitting it really well off the tee and on approach, and when his short game's just been average, so we're relative to our baseline, we're pretty bullish on Rory because he's hitting it really well, and then he goes to Europe where there's no strokes gain data, I suppose, and he continues to play really well. You should be updating his category specific skills because we know he played well. We don't know exactly how he did it, but that is new information that we need to incorporate into our predictions of Rory's strokes gained category skills going forward. And so how we do it, we don't really do it like this anymore. But one way we did try was basically just fit a model when a golfer gains, we know Rory's skill profile, and when he gains 4 shots off the tee or 4 shots total, we can use historical data to say, okay, given that, that means the most likely we can basically predict his category SG based off what his total was and his skill profile. And so that's kind of what we used to do. We would update players if we would basically fill in the missing category data with our best guess given what their total SG was, and then so that would give us like a complete data set where part of it's imputed for all the category SG.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So let me maybe say that back to you. I mean, you're essentially like if you're missing the shot link data that gives you the granular data on shots and Rory's playing better on a tour there, then you're kind of guessing that he's striking the ball pretty well. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
we yeah, exactly. Generally if he goes and plays even better than he was playing in the US, we'd be like, okay, given what we know about Rory and what we know about golf performance in general, we're going to update his strokes gained off the tee prediction by whatever point one, point two. Basically, historically, you we would just when you look at a lot of variation in golf performance under in short time spans is due to putting and approach. So basically, if a golfer plays really well, we are kind of going to assume most of that is just putting and approach, just because off the tee doesn't vary as much. So, but yeah, the way you said it was correct. We're just using that data without that didn't have shot link data to update. We're first going to impute what we think the category data would have been, and then we can use that to update our predictions of Rory's skill in each category.
Awesome. So now you have all these player ratings, and how do you use that to predict the next tournament, like the U.S. Open next week?
Yeah. So right. So we have this clean measure of performance at every tournament, and then the next step, in very simple terms, is just we're going to use all the data available leading up to a tournament to uh, best predict the golfer's strokes gained in that next tournament. And so roughly what we so our like baseline model is going to be basically just a weighted average of a golfer's historical true strokes gained, and the weights are going to be equal to they're going to decay at some rate that we've estimated this rate to minimize whatever out of sample prediction error. And that's basically it. So we had true strokes gained, and now we have a weighted average of a golfer's true strokes gained, and that sort of is our baseline prediction. And then there's a lot more in the baseline model. We kind of just do the weights according to the sequence in which the rounds were played. So like a golfer's most recent round would receive some weight, and their second most recent round would receive uh, a slightly lower weight, but it doesn't matter how far apart the rounds were, for example. But that's not ideal. So then we have like another baseline where it's weighted according to time, like how many days ago the round was played, and then we sort of do a weighted average of those averages to get maybe our true baseline. We have many different because it's always good to be averaging across different weighting schemes and stuff like that. But that's roughly that's how we get the goal, anyways. With this is to get a measure of skill or like what our expectation is for the golfer's next performance. And then the final step is to generate the probabilities, which is what appears on our website, is to simulate the tournament. And for that, and this is the way we did it in our really early years, was you could just assume like a normal distribution because golf scores at the round level are roughly normally distributed. And so the process I just described would give us our expectations, so the mean of each golfer's distribution. And then we would have a less complicated, but still player specific method for estimating standard deviation. And then we can just simulate golfer scores. And then once you can simulate golfer scores, you can handle any tournament regardless of the format, whether there's a cut, whether there's, well, that's pretty much the only thing, the cut. And so we're just simulating all 4 rounds, cutting players in halfway through. And yeah, there's a lot of details there too, but those are the 3 steps that I would say describe our methodology.
Very cool. So when you're simulating it, does the course play a role in there yet? Right? Like, is it different for a long par 5 as opposed to a short par 3?
So actually, so a couple points. So first, we're simulating this at the round level. So we're not simulating, and this for our pre-tournament model. We also do live stuff, but for the pre-tournament model, we're just simulating the round level. And so there's course specific stuff. We haven't talked about this, but uh, one of the one of the deviations from a player's baseline is the baseline skill, or by skill I mean our expectation of their strokes gain going forward. Uh, a couple of the deviations off of that are going to be course specific adjustments, so course fit, course history. So that is big. So that's part of the simulation in the sense that golfer skills affect that, are affected by that. And then the only other thing really that is in the simulation that's course specific is the variance. So there's some courses, and this is pretty predictive. There's some courses that just have a higher variance. There's more in scores, even after conditioning on the players in the field and all that. Just some tournaments have higher variance, and that can be due to the fact that there's lots of hazards, so lots of penalty strokes. The par plays a slight role. If there's more par 5s than there are par 3s, then or sorry, that would never happen. But the opposite, if it's a par 70 versus a par 72, it'll be slightly lower variance, all else equal. So that's part of it. And then a minor thing is like we're accounting for course uncertainty between. This is related to your tee time comment earlier. If you're in the morning wave versus the afternoon wave, we model those as kind of distinct things. So the morning wave might get a positive shock, the course might play half a shot easier in the morning uh, than it does in the afternoon, and so that's in the simulation, and so that's essentially just adding randomness to the simulation, and that's gonna help lower skilled players and hurt the higher skilled players slightly. And that's pretty much it for the pre-tournament
Okay.
simulation.
Awesome. And so, also while we're at it, you've done a lot of work on course fit as well. So you mentioned that kind of comes in with the variability, but there's something with each player on each course too that you do as well, right? And this is something that's been
Yeah,
more recent.
yeah, yeah. Course fit was like 20, uh, 2020, I think. Maybe, yeah, I think it was 2020. In our early days, when we were more active on Twitter, we kind of made a big stink about how course fit and course history didn't matter at all. But in our as we've aged, we've realized it does matter quite a bit, especially. So I guess to define terms, yeah, course fit is going to be the idea that certain golfer skills, and I'm using skills again. So here we can think of skills or golfer attributes as like their driving distance, their driving accuracy, their strokes, how good they are on approach shots, how good are on the green, and how good they are at putting. Those are kind of the five we use. And so course fit is basically the idea that certain courses are going to reward these skills differently. The obvious example would be longer courses are going to reward, generally speaking, longer courses are going to reward players that hit it further. And reward here means they're going to overperform. Guys who hit it far are going to overperform uh, our estimate of their baseline skill. And the baseline skill basically should be interpreted as what we would expect in the average PGA Tour course. And so course fit, the way we present it on the website, is as deviations from this baseline. So how much better we expect at a given course, how much better do we expect this specific player to play based on their skill profile? And yeah, if you there's a good page on our website that sort of presents our course estimates, because the way we present it is like you can look at each course and we show how much it favors each attribute relative to the average course.
Right.
And driving distance and driving accuracy are kind of the main courses mainly differ along those two lines, which driving accuracy and driving distance, which I think there's I think I understand why it is. Initially, I didn't really, but there's really not much difference, like in terms of how much courses favor good putters. So the idea would be that good putters play well at this specific course. You don't really see that, and that could be due to two things. Either the courses truly don't differ that much in sort of like a green is a green, and it
Mhm.
it doesn't really matter, or it could just be that putting data is so variable that we don't have enough data, because a lot of these courses we might only have 3 years, 2 years of data, and it might just not be enough to estimate these course specific differences.
So, but you're a golfer, so which one do you think is true based on the fact that you play golf? I mean, there's
I'm
clearly differences in greens, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you have to keep in mind there are for sure. I guess a few things to keep in mind are that I mean, tour pros are really, really good. So things that we perceive as big differences might not be big differences for them. But still, Augusta is way different than um, the average tour course in terms of um, the green complexes are just it's not really what they see week to week. They probably have more 5 footers that week than any other week, just because it's the greens are so undulating that you just end up with a lot of them. But this is kind of stuff we've been working on recently. Um, yeah, well, to answer your question, I think yeah, it's probably mostly just the data. Putting data is so random that like we're trying to estimate this model with course fit. Like what we're doing is we're essentially running a regression of total strokes gained on these attributes, but then we have to interact those attributes with these course dummies. And so there's a lot of courses. There's like 60 courses, and so you're interacting 60 courses with these five variables. You end up with a lot of parameters, and so very quickly you may not have enough data to estimate those with any certainty. And then also you're trying not to overfit this, so um, yeah, we're not using a standard regression. We're using this random effect thing just so we don't. There's a lot of noise, and we don't want to
Right.
overestimate the course specific effects, which is very easy to do. And so, yeah, I think it's mostly due to just putting being variable. Um, but I think what we really want to do is break course fit further. So not just don't just look at putting. Look at Jordan Spieth's a good example. He's a guy who's clearly a good lag putter, but he's a very bad short putter, or at least right now. And so if we can break golfer skills, putting skills into these smaller buckets, and then look at courses that say like Augusta is an example of a course I think where you have a lot of 5 foot putts there. It's intuitively it makes sense that that would hurt a guy like Spieth who's not putting well on short putts. Courses where um, you're gonna have more. I mean, it's pretty obvious. If you have a lot of short putts, you're not good at short putts. It's not gonna help you. So I think that kind of might be the missing link in our current course fit stuff. But I've been working on it for a bit. It's tricky, but
Right. I mean, when I was looking at your predictions for the last major, I'm kind of looking at how a golfer's win probability, rank and win probability kind of differs from their overall ranking, your primary ranking, and using that as just kind of an estimate of course fit. And it seems like the changes are very small still.
yeah, yeah, they are. So yeah, to quantify it, like I mean, they are small. Okay, so for the most part, if you were to if I was to get my course fit estimates for every player in every round in 2021, I actually did this last night. The standard deviation is only 0.1, or yeah, I think it's 0.1 strokes. So it's not nothing. So yeah, that's pretty. I mean, that's
That's
well,
small,
and
right?
to give some context, the difference between like the 30th ranked golfer in our rankings. Uh, well, let's see. Jonathan Vegas is the 76th or the 56th ranked golfer in our rankings at plus zero point 0.7. So that means we think he's zero point 0.7 strokes better than the average player,
Per round.
and per round, yeah. And Brandon Steele is the 63rd, so he's 7 ranking spots down, and he's zero point 0.1 strokes worse than Vegas. So it's small, but it's still golfers. Their zero point 0.1 strokes is it's not nothing. It means that if Vegas was able to play a course that was kind of like one standard deviation in his favor in terms of fit, he would be ranked like 8 spots higher. So yeah, it's not huge, but there are courses. Basically, there's going to be courses where it doesn't matter at all, and then there's going to be courses where it matters a ton. And the largest adjustments in our I think that we made in 2021 were like zero point 0.7 strokes in either direction. So there was a positive zero point 0.7 and there was a negative zero point 0.7. And so and they were probably from the same tournament because there's one tournament in particular. It's not a big event, but it's played in Mexico at this course called El Chameleon Golf Club, and it's basically carved out of the bush, and it favors. So if you miss fairways, you're basically taking a penalty stroke, and so it favors driving accuracy as you'd expect. And so at that course, there are huge differences. Like to think that I never would have thought 3 years ago when we weren't really looking into course fit that much, that we would be adjusting like a full stroke. Because if we go half a stroke one direction on one guy and half a stroke on the other, obviously it's a full stroke total. That's a huge difference. So course fit, sorry, course fit doesn't matter much most of the time, but it does matter sometimes.
Matt, you've also done a lot of work in looking at the predictability of various shots, off the tee versus putting. You've already described it a little bit, but tell us again just the differences between the various types of shots for golfers.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so like as I said, I guess when you think of predictability or predictive power, I think there's of different shot types. There's like a few different ways you could go with how to interpret that question. I think the intuitive way is what I've already described. If I was to give you the choice between seeing a golfer hit 10 drives or seeing a golfer hit 10 putts, and then from that you have to estimate how good you think they are, you're going to want to see the drives just because, well, actually, that's not necessarily, well, the drives are going to tell you, they are going to tell you more about the golfer's overall skill. And more specifically, they're going to tell you more about the drives will tell you more about that player's off the tee skill than the putts will tell you about their putting skill. Um,
Right.
the reason I the reason I hesitated there is just because uh, it could be the case that even though putting is super high variance, which it is, and that's why 10 putts doesn't tell you that much, it could be the case that if you had a long enough sample of data, like suppose putting skill could be like basically fixed over time for players as opposed to varying over time. And it could be the case that you need like 3 years of data to accurately estimate players' putting skill. But once you do, there are big differences in players' putting skill. Like so, my I'm not sure if it makes sense, but what I'm saying is, and well, conversely, it could be the case you only need like 30 rounds to estimate a golfer's off the tee skill, but maybe there just aren't big differences between golfers off the tee. Um,
Okay.
and so what that would mean is that putting could be, in that sense, putting would be more predictive of performance. If you know what you're doing, putting could be more predictive of performance because I just need to estimate skill based off this really big sample of data, bigger than what I need for off the tee. And once I have that, it actually does tell me a lot about future performance. It turns out that that's not the case, and that in golf, basically, putting or sorry, off the tee and approach. When I estimate golfer skill for every golfer on the PGA Tour, and just look at like the standard deviation in that distribution of skill, off the tee and approach are pretty similar, and then around the green and putting are also pretty similar. And so, but approach is kind of a good example. Like approach is pretty high variance, and the reason approach is high variance is kind of interesting because in all of this, I'm measuring skill by strokes gained, and so
Mhm.
the thing about strokes gained is as you get close to the hole, it gets super nonlinear. So hitting an approach shot to 20 feet versus 25 feet is not a huge difference in SG, just because the probability of holding a 20-foot putt is not that much different than 25-foot putt. But hitting a shot to 3 feet instead of 8 feet, so still a 5 foot difference, that's a massive difference in SG. That's going to be like half a shot or zero point 0.4 shots. And so this is where, and that's most likely not due to skill. If I hit a shot 5 feet closer and it ends up 20 feet versus hitting a shot 5 feet closer than somebody else and it ends up at 3 feet, that's kind of just luck. And so that's part of the reason I think SG approach is pretty high variance. And that also kind of illustrates why strokes gained is not necessarily, strokes gained is incredibly useful for descriptive purposes. It tells you exactly how a golfer ended up gaining however many strokes they did on the field. But it's not necessarily great for predicting, just because, I mean, it is pretty good, obviously, but uh, there are ways you could intuitively, you'd think you could improve strokes gained approach for predictive purposes by accounting for the fact that a player who hits a ton of shots, or like a player who hits like 3 shots in a round to 3 feet, they sort of get, that's kind of lucky in some sense. They get these big boosts to their SG approach from those 3 shots compared to someone who hit like 8 or 9 shots to 15 to 20 feet. Their approach skills, their SG approach in that round is probably more stable. Um, but even though that makes sense intuitively, I have yet to be able to find anything really actionable in using that intuition to try and improve SG. It's difficult. Golf honestly is so variable and so random, and the samples of data you need are so large to estimate things, that you kind of run into this problem where you need a ton of data, but players' skill levels change over time. So like it's like this trade off. Like the further I go back in time, yeah, the more data I get, but it's also that golfer from back then is just different. So uh, that's actually not that related to the SG approach thing, but it's kind of, it's meant to illustrate the point that just there's so much variance in golf that it's a lot of intuitive theories don't work. And
Right. Well, I mean, I think you hit it on the head. Well, I think it's interesting that you talked about how it varies between golfer, right? So let's say you're using your analytics to bet. How much do you use like kind of subjective analysis, watching these guys to inform your bets as on top of your model?
yeah, so I don't use it at all because uh, I don't really. I mean, we bet with our. So we bet for a while. I didn't have a background in betting at all, and then we bet through our. We used to post. This year we stopped doing it, but we would post all our bets that our model would have made on our website, just because people like to see that. So that had no subjective, well, very little subjective. It was never, the only subjectivity was like sometimes if there was a guy that I felt we were off on, and we just kept showing a ton of value on him throughout the week, I would maybe not place another bet. But that's more of like a bankroll thing where it's like I don't want to have so many units on the same guy. But No, pretty much no subjectivity, but I do think there is room for it. I think that, and I think people are aware of this, like sharp bettors who, because our stuff now influences partly because we post our stuff early in the week, which might not be that wise, but our stuff does influence the betting market a lot, to the point where there's some books that are just straight copying them, and so I think there is a lot of room for people to use intuition to uh, add value to our predictions, so and make money against books that are using our predictions. And I hope people do that because I don't like when books are copying our stuff. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think,
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I think our stuff's it's fundamentally really good, and it's a really solid baseline. And golf's a good sport for this compared to I think team sports and where there's matchups like basketball. It's a lot trickier. But golf, our baselines are really good. But yeah, I think intuition and it can get you in trouble, but I think it can help too. Although I've never actually done that at scale, but I think it could.
Yeah, I think it's like most sports that are difficult to bet, right? I mean, you need a quantitative baseline to help you, and then you need to understand what the hell's going on with all the teams. And I mean, that's similar to what I do at the power rank with football. I mean, a quantitative baseline I believe in, but you can't just use that to bet. And injuries are just the first of things to consider, but you also need to know context of the teams, ceiling of players, ceiling of teams, whether a team has a high
Yeah,
ceiling versus a low floor, so on and so forth. And I presume those types of things apply to golfers as well.
yeah, I think they do, but probably to a lesser degree. And I mean, ceilings and floors are, in theory, things we can capture with our estimate of players' distributions or standard deviations, but not perfectly. And there are examples where, like, I mean, okay, a good example where our model struggles is like a guy like Spieth, who was historically good, like historically had a historically great season in like 2015, and then was really whatever a top five, top three player in the world for like 3 years, and then he fell off. And then the way our model works, the decay and stuff like that, is we end up not really weighting rounds that are more than like 2 years old, pretty much. So when Spieth came back in early 2021, and he had a stretch. Well, he played really well in a few tournaments, and the books and the market pretty much updated. They updated super quickly on that, and I think logically the thought process was, well, Spieth. I mean, he's flashing form. We know he can reach an elite level. He's found it again, and our model doesn't really update on Spieth in that situation any different than we would on some random player who had a similar 2 years to Spieth, which was like whatever he was playing like an 80th best player in the world. And then if that 80th non-Spieth player, whatever, had 3 really good weeks in a row, I mean, we so basically our model should be differentiating between those two players, but it's really hard because I don't know, we kind of the way we do things long term data more than like 3 years old just doesn't really have any predictive power. But I do think there is something to that, like where it's and this is probably the main thing where we when our model is deviating from the market, it's because it's often because of this. It's a guy who used to be good
Yep.
and maybe slumped, and then he's coming back super quickly, and the market's updating super quickly, and we're not.
No, I mean I've found that as well. For the PGA, I noticed that your numbers were low on Matt Kuchar compared to the markets, and I think this was someone that had success over a decade ago, and then also had success. I guess a couple of tournaments heading into PGA last month,
Yeah, yeah.
and yeah, I mean, so anyways, I bet Joaquin Neiman matchup over Kuchar, which was a roller coaster ride, but finally won late on Sunday afternoon. But I would think that you know, I mean, your model is looking more at a bigger set of data, and it's not going to overreact to a couple good rounds by Jordan Spieth or Matt Kuchar. And I got to think those are the types of bets that are going to pay off because the market's thinking, oh, this guy's all of a sudden back.
I think in general that would be true. Honestly, part of the problem now is that with our matchup stuff, just because books tend to post matchups later, and our stuff does influence the market a lot. And so what you said is true generally, and I think if our stuff was not out there, there would be a lot more players where we find that. Like um, basically we'd be finding value on a lot more players just because our model isn't getting big in the market. Obviously, that makes sense. Um, and a few of the cases maybe that we would find value on, where the market has overreacted to a couple good performances, we're not finding value on it now just because our model is having a bigger influence. And so sometimes what ends up happening is because the market is still obviously smart and there's a lot of information in it. And so we kind of end up with well, to put it this way, we lost a lot of money betting on Spieth last year because the market was right and our model was stubborn for a bit, and so we kept hammering miscut bets and tournament matchups and stuff like that. And so I guess my point is, at some point, if your models if the market is taking all the useful information out of your model, all that you're going to be left with is the matchups where the market's got it right and this guy actually is back. Obviously, it's not that simple, but yeah, and I'm kind of, this is a bad advertisement for our model right now, but I do think we're right some of the time. And yeah, we're in general, I think that is true that the market will react to things too quickly, and they have too much faith in players getting back to their previous really high skill level. Um, but sometimes they're right, and
Right.
so I would need to look into whether or not we've what sort of the which side of the scale the profits fallen on there. I'm not sure, but
Right. So, Matt, we have the U.S. Open next week, being played in Brookline, Massachusetts, major tournament. Do you have any? I Data Golf you guys will post your predictions on Monday morning.
yeah, usually Monday morning for me, or usually Monday afternoon for majors. Yeah, sometimes a bit earlier.
So, any thoughts kind of heading into the weekend? I know we're still getting data from the tournament this weekend, but any thoughts about the U.S. Open heading into next weekend?
Yeah, I think so. One kind of frustrating thing with the majors sometimes is that they're often played at new courses, and so we don't have any course data, and so then we can't do our usual course fit adjustments. But
Right.
over we will do some stuff. So I mean, I actually watched the video last night on the course, and I think there are a few general things about majors and U.S. Opens that are going to apply. Um, so first off, you can get, we don't have data from the course, but we can obviously get the scorecard data, and so we know how long the course is. And so Brookline, or the Country Club, I guess it's like 7,200 yards, which is pretty short actually for, well, it's a 7,200 yard par 70, but I think it's going to play it pretty short, and so that's a bit unusual for that's a bit unusual, I guess, for a major. Um, but it's like a pretty unique course, and so I think variance is going to be pretty high. And like historically, when you look at U.S. Opens, uh, variance does tend to be high. So variance in round scores, and it's probably because they're just playing. It's not the type of golf they normally play. Obviously, the greens, it varies by year, but the greens are often super firm. Fairways are firm. The rough's super long, and so it often there's just a lot of variance, and so
So, is that
obviously with
saying that it's usually played on difficult courses?
I mean, I don't know if there's probably, I think, yeah, there is probably a correlation between variance and difficulty, but it's not mechanical. It doesn't have to be that way. But yeah, I think it's often due to marginal shots are just punished a lot at these. Okay, actually, that's related. That reminds me of a good point, which is it could be high variance, but if that variance is just separating the good players from the bad players more, then that's very different from the kind of variance that's just
Hmm.
random and just
Right.
adding we're just increasing the standard deviation of everybody's residual
Right.
performance.
Like high wind or something.
Yeah, exactly. And so, well, high wind, yeah, even high wind could separate the good ball strikers from the bad ones, but generally it just wreaks havoc like at the players. And so I think for the US Open, I think it's going to be overall, it might separate good players more, but there's always a lot of randomness. So we'll probably build that into our model for the week. So we'll have higher variance. Um, and we're going to use the scorecard data to do some stuff on uh, what approach distances we expect guys to be hitting from. And this is all brand new stuff. I don't know if it'll be on the site, but we might sort of just make up a course fit profile using intuition and stuff like this. But if you know, if you know that there's two 650-yard par fives, you might think that that's not going to favor bomber. Those two holes aren't going to favor bombers that much because nobody can get to the green. Um, that's just one example, but like basically you can estimate based off just yardage, we've estimated how much of an advantage you'd expect different types of players to have,
Right.
bombers, accurate players, etc. So we can do something like that. Um, but yeah, majors are frustrating because there's no course data. And then in terms of just like our baseline predictions, I mean, I think we're still going to probably have Rom favored. I
Okay.
think, although I'm not sure. It's pretty close to. It's a lot
Yeah,
closer at the top right now than it was.
yeah. I mean, he's fallen from second to fourth in your rankings since last month, and I know. I mean, it's tiny, right? Because the differences are so small, but you do think you'll have Rom big as your favorite.
Right. Yeah. So I guess one thing is our rankings, and this is sort of a. I don't know if this is. Well, I think this is correct. For our rankings, we only use total scores because I think rankings should reflect performance. I guess this is kind of related to the rankings in like college football. Like I wouldn't even if a team objectively got super lucky, if they won the game, they won the game, and I think rankings should only look at that win, like an official ranking system.
Right.
Whereas on our website, we also have a page called the URL is datagolf.com and then skill ratings, and then so skill ratings take into account not just SG total but also the categories, also a few other things. And in that, Rom is number one, I think.
Ah, got it.
Or he's not, I don't know, he's not actually. It's super close to the top there. Scheffler, Rory, and Rom are all close. And so for a while, Rom, even though he was like third or fourth in our rankings, he was still number one in the skill ratings just because he'd been putting poorly basically, and so we weren't updating
Right.
too much on that, and he was still hitting that super well, and so yeah, he was getting a boost off his baseline.
Right. Excellent. Is so U.S. Open? Is it maybe a tournament where you want to? It's higher variance, so is it potentially something that you want to bet some of the longer shots that the numbers like?
Yeah, yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I, yeah, I mean the U.S. Open not so much as the British Open probably, where that's really, even just looking at winners over the years, so you get a lot of weird winners. But I think in general next week, yeah, there will be a lot of variance.
Awesome, Matt. I'd like to end the show with some potentially non-sports questions. What's your favorite book?
Uh, so I don't really do favorites, so this will have a lot of recency bias. But I have two for books. One is like a statistics textbook slash novel, which is Mostly Harmless by Josh Angress, and that had a huge influence on my academic career. So that's a book that
Wait, hold on. The book is mostly harmless, and it's a
harmless,
novel.
harmless.
Oh, it's just harmless.
It's mostly harmless. Okay, sorry. Okay,
Wait,
maybe
sorry.
we
What?
went. I'll redo the answer. The actual name of the book I think is Mostly Harmless Econometrics.
Okay.
And uh, yeah, I mean maybe that's a weird thing to have for a favorite book, but that had a huge influence on. Uh, it's not your standard statistical textbook. It does read more like a novel. Not a novel, but okay, novel's not the right word. It's a very casually written textbook, and it builds in a lot of experience from real life. Um, Okay, but if textbooks are off the table, one of my favorite books is called Perlman's Silence by Pascal Mercier, and it's about this academic that basically realizes he doesn't like doing academic work anymore, and he slowly loses his mind. And it's an excellent book.
Yeah. So have you read Night Train to Lisbon?
Oh yeah, 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 yeah. That's how I got to this book. Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome. So sorry, tell me the name of the other Pascal Mercier book.
Perlman's Silence.
Perlman Silence. I think that might be right up my alley as a former academic, although it's been a long time
It's
since
a
I've.
great, yeah, it's a great. It resonated a lot with me. So yeah, you'll probably like it.
Yeah. Night Train to Lisbon resonated a lot with me. I read it before we were supposed to head to Lisbon on on a trip before basically the trip got canceled because of the pandemic.
Right.
But the novel, like, it's just amazing. I feel like it's this kind of dorky classics high school teacher in Germany, and it's all kind of about, in some sense, finding yourself. I don't know. I really love the book. I've recommended it to a bunch of people, like especially people who are maybe in their 40s and don't
Yeah,
know if what they're doing is what they want to be doing. And it's about this man's journey, and really powerful book. Like I think he's an academic, isn't he, Mercier?
yeah. And I think it might not even be his real name. He might write under a pseudonym, but yeah, yeah. It's. I think the other reason that Night to Lisbon is quite good is just that you're essentially. I mean, in the book, the guy's reading this book constantly, and this book has these random philosophical snippets in it, and so you're sort of constantly. It's very easy to work in uh, these philosophical thoughts just because they're in the book, within the book, and that I found was very good and really thought provoking a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I still remember some of the scenes towards the end of the book pretty vivid. Yeah, I feel like I remember a lot of scenes from that book very vividly. You know, like he's a good writer. Or I don't know if it's necessarily the writing, but he creates situations that are memorable. I guess that's
For sure, yeah.
the best way to put it. Real quick, I want to go back to Mostly Harmless Econometrics. I was just Googling it real quick, and it sounds like there's a Mostly Harmless book by like Douglas Adams. Is it kind of like
Yeah,
based
yeah,
on that?
yeah. It is based on that. Yeah, yeah. No, it's the if that book is great if you think you understand because econometrics and economists like a lot of the work they do is still basically at the end of the day linear regression, and I think regression is incredibly powerful and people don't really, especially if you don't come from a setting where you're using it to like understand causality. That I mean that book, the first chapter in that book is like really good. It'll if you already have a good understanding of regression and you read that, I think you'll have a lot of breakthroughs in terms of how to think about causality and stuff. It's a really good book. I recommend it.
No, that's awesome. I'm gonna go check that out because I feel like, well, first of all, I mean, I kind of consider myself a teacher. It's kind of the aspect of analytics that I really like, and most textbooks suck because
Yeah,
they give you no reason for why you want to do anything, and they're boring, and so on and so forth. But I think it sounds like this is a book that kind of really engages you, right? Which I think is missing in so much of our education.
yeah. It's a textbook, but it's really not like a traditional textbook. So I think yeah, you might like it a lot.
That is awesome. All right, Matt. So, how about your best culinary experience?
Okay, so yeah, I'm not much of a foodie, but I'm gonna recommend Rudy in Toronto, which is this. I live in Toronto currently. I just moved here somewhat recently, and it's just a burger place, but it's really really good, and it's basically McDonald's, but better in every way. So a smash burger and fries from Rudy is the recommendation.
That's awesome. I feel like a lot of places in the U.S. try to do like the upscale burger, right? Like Shake Shack is one my kids like a lot. Is
Yeah.
is that kind of the feel?
Uh, yeah, yeah, potentially, yeah. It's still pretty like it is. It's not like super. Well, I guess Shake Shack isn't either. I've never had it, but Shake Shack that is. Um, but yeah, it's just like a slightly more refined McDonald's, but it's I think more than slightly refined. It's very very good. It could be similar to that. Yeah.
Awesome, Matt. If you had dinner with any one person, dead or alive, who would it be?
This also reflects my recency bias, but I'm gonna say Anthony Bourdain because I just watched. I mean, I already like the guy, and but I just watched a recent film about his life, and yeah, it just really resonated with me. And I think he's someone, yeah, I'd want to talk to just to get his, you know, yeah, thoughts on life and more
Absolutely.
philosophical things. Yeah.
I mean, what would you most want to talk to him about? Like food or travel or
Oh no, I mean
cooking?
a bit. I think all a bit of that stuff. Like clearly, he's a very fun guy to be around. But no, I think honestly, I guess. So I guess it might not be the uh, most lighthearted dinner. I just thought he had. I mean, obviously it ended very badly for him, but no, I think he just would have. I think I'd want to understand his outlook on life, and just when I watched that movie, I feel like quite a few things resonated with me, and yeah, I'd want to understand sort of why he struggled the way he did because he's clearly such a incredible person. But yeah, so I just think it'd be a really thought provoking and an interesting
Yeah.
conversation to have.
So you're talking about Roadrunner, the documentary that recently came out,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I watched that on a plane to Las Vegas. I thought it was it kind of it's so sad.
Yeah, it is.
And it hits you in a way. Well, documentaries are great because they're real in ways that fictional movies can never be, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we all know how it ends, and it's really sad. But like, I feel like getting into the details of that. Yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Matt Courchene, thank you so much for joining me on the Football Analytics Show. Please let everyone know where they can get your work.
Yeah, all our work's going to be published on datagolf.com, and we're also on Twitter, which I think our handle is just @datagolf. So give us a follow.
Awesome. And let's just real quick, Data Golf. I'm a Scratch Plus subscriber. I highly recommend it. But you guys have so many free resources. So I guess tell a little bit people more about the free resources.
Yeah, I think the paywalled stuff on our site is mainly for bettors, and I guess there's probably a lot of bettors listening, but most of our site is free. And I think anyone who's wants to get interested in the data side of golf or is already themselves a golf nut, there's just a lot of cool stuff there that honestly Will and I think is still mostly not discovered yet by most people. So even just probably our most popular page on the site is just the player profiles, where you can just see, you can pull up Tiger's page, and we have because like I said earlier, we have this clean measure of performance. You can kind of just look at Tiger's trajectory over his entire career because we have a few nice graphs and stuff. Or you can look at amateurs because we have amateur data, and you can kind of see, okay, how good was John Rahm right when he turned pro relative to an average PGA Tour player. And yeah, to me, I find there's a lot of questions that we try and answer that I think are super interesting just for golf fans. And we also put a ton of work into the blog section on our site, and all those are free, and they're kind of buried on the site, but if you get to them, I think they can be pretty rewarding. So those are the two things that come to mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I read through a bunch of, I started with the FAQ, and then that leads to more detailed articles about your methods, and learned a lot. And I would highly recommend anyone that's kind of looking into analytics in any field to check that out. So thank you for all the great work.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me on, Ed.
Thank you for listening to this podcast episode with Matt Courchene. I really like what they're doing over there at Data Golf. And in fact, if I were to do some golf predictions, I would do it essentially just like they are doing it. I think it's a great product. Go check it out at datagolf.com. A reminder, my free sports betting email newsletter is available to everyone at thepowerrank.com. The emphasis is mostly NFL and college football. However, I do write about things like golf during the off season. In fact, I will have an email about the US Open the week of that tournament. To get this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. I'm always honored that you listen to this podcast. Next week, I'll have an episode about how to get sports betting accounts. After that, we'll really start digging into football and football analytics again. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you again soon.